Armored Core is a series that has been around since 1997. Over the years, the series has gone through many different design iterations, with each generational release shaking up the feel of the game quite a bit. In this video, I want to talk about a few of the things I think Armored Core needs to get right in order to succeed in this current generation. Starting off with what is probably the biggest necessity is a modernization of controls for the Armored Core series. Armored Core has always had a bit of a clunky design, especially for how quickly the game plays. Even looking at the more recent entries, it feels like there's a lot of button bloat going on. There are a lot of different systems to manage, from scanning, boosting, recon, and of course your arsenal. With boosting alone, there are like 3 separate controls, and looking at Armored Core 5 as an example here, in order to boost, you toggle it on and off by just tapping L1, and then if you want to boost dodge, it's square. But then there's a special melee boost attack that you can do if you hold square. Then to do an overboost, you have to click L3. I hope this example kind of clearly shows that for this one mechanic of boosting, there are 3 separate buttons tied to many different mechanics, and this is before we even get to maintaining your arsenal, which is a whole separate discussion. I think the controls need to be a little bit more consolidated, just to try to avoid some of the complaints that might come in around artificial difficulty just because the button mapping might be a little whack. The second item on this list is Armored Core needs to have engaging boss encounters. Traditionally speaking, Armored Core bosses have been difficult, but they're not always the most interesting. I think in today's generation of games, there has to be a good mix of both. Some fights could just straight up be face tanked, which is fun, but not always the most engaging, and of course this kind of depends on how you designing your mech, of course, but I would just like to see a few more fights that force you to use the environment to avoid attacks. We do have the level design being overhauled after all, or maybe just give me a specific part of a boss to attack, which I can use environments to gain positional advantages to get towards that vulnerable part. There are radar jammers in the game too, so maybe make it so that those are relevant by allowing us to sneak around the environment. I think this could open up a few more interesting playstyles, especially around guerrilla warfare gameplay. This is something that we're already seeing more of in the trailers, but I think adding telegraphed attacks to avoid is a great addition to the series that it definitely needed. Having the player make the best choice on how to avoid devastating attacks will not only force the player to make customizations to how their mech moves, but it also keeps them on their toes. I just hope that if a boss is using melee attacks more often, this doesn't just let players stand all the way towards the back and fire pot shots, but I have faith that From Software won't let that happen. Speaking of pot shots though, the next item that kind of contradicts what I said a little bit, and that's keep the focus of combat on ranged combat. Of course, From Software has said that that is still the intent, and what I meant earlier is that if a boss is going to be designed for melee attacks, they have a way to engage a player who is built for ranged combat to keep them moving around. I still want the game to be focused around that ranged combat because I find the customizations abundant and unique for ranged combat. We have several different types of ranged weapon categories, all with unique stats and qualities. You can make a build that focuses entirely on missile salvos, or maybe a sniper mech, for example. The stagger system that's been added seems to support a more hybrid build, which I think is great for customization and varied combat styles. I know it's FromSoft's intent to have the game focus around ranged combat, but I don't want the meta to kind of shift into almost exclusively melee, because I think melee options are a little bit limiting, I guess. I know they're adding new categories, which is cool, but I just think that the customization options for both melee and ranged is better than just exclusively melee, and this is coming from someone who only played melee mechs in the previous games. The next item is pretty quick but impactful. Armored Core is a mission-based game, meaning you select missions from a hub and then set out on those missions in a predetermined area. There's no open world to explore with quests to pick up along the way. As a result, I hope there's some incentives to replay missions. In previous entries, there were kind of deviating paths depending on which kind of corporation you decided to align yourself with, and you could go back and do missions aligned with a different corporation, which would give you a different ending, and I think that's a cool aspect for story. But I hope that, and this might be a controversial take, I would like to see certain missions have parts locked behind something like getting an S rank on the mission, or maybe there are secret parts hidden within than certain missions that it kind of forces players to go out and explore. This next item on this list is something that we already touched on a little bit, and it's extremely important, and that's to keep the customization detailed. The endgame of Armored Core is essentially just making whatever cool mech designs that you want and can think of. In the previous entries, the customization was so robust and there were a ton of parameters and metrics to kind of maintain and manage in order to get your mech working the way that you want it to. For example, there were things called stabilizers in Armored Core 4, which had very minor kind of like influence. It just kind of helped your mech turn quicker. But the way that it kind of influenced that was if your mech was heavy on one side, maybe you had a heavy right-handed weapon, you could stick a stabilizer on your left side and it would kind of balance out. I think that level of customization is really cool and unique, and I hope it makes a return. This level of fine-tuning really gives players the chance to min-max their creation's capabilities, and I'm all for it. Finally, maybe the least important aspect of Armored Core, but my personal favorite would be to have an engaging multiplayer. In FromSoft games, multiplayer usually feels like it's an afterthought, but in Armored Core, the multiplayer felt really unique because of how you could see some truly cool designs and trade schematics or blueprints for builds. Due to the level of customization available in Armored Core, it felt like you never really had a dedicated meta kind of form because everyone was always doing some really cool stuff, and it was hard to tell what was actually the best because of how hard the game was to play as well. Armored Core 5 tried to take this approach of a multiplayer first game by slowing down combat and making the mechs feel like they had a lot more weight behind them, and I think that game kind of failed because of how slow and sluggish the multiplayer actually felt. So I would like Armored Core 6 to have an engaging, faster paced combat where an online community can thrive, because having multiplayer where fans can duke it out in an arena adds longevity to the game. Finally, as a bonus quick item, I hope the Armored Core reboot continues to have a fantastic soundtrack. If you want to hear an incredible song, just go listen to the Armored Core 4 Answer title song. I'll have it in the description below. This was such a nostalgic sound hearing this for the first time after so many years, and I hope Armored Core 6 delivers on that front as well. But that's going to be it for this list. If you want to see more Armored Core content in the near future, consider subscribing to this channel to stay notified. But this is GooberTroy saying thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.